Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. Dr. Maisha here, and um, welcome to another episode. So today, if you follow me, which many people who listen to the podcast on a regular basis, who follow me, who join me for the lives on a regular basis, know that I love and have a passion for empowering us as adults and parents and parent adjacents, like our educators, around our kids. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about um, understanding our kids' personalities, but I want to do it from a different lens. So I love the Myers-Briggs profile, and Myers-Briggs is a popular personality profile test that if you've ever heard of 16personalities.com, but it categorizes people into 16 different personality types. Now, what I want to say first before I move into, and I'm going to actually be doing a little bit of a series on that. Uh, Yes. And so I before I move into this, I am going to talk a little bit about today this understanding our children's personality through this Myers-Briggs lens, which I'm going to explain in just a moment. And I'm going to do a little overview, but we're going to go through each of the lenses that I'll be talking about over the next few weeks. So if you want to know, join me throughout. But this is a personality uh, profile tool instrument that is not meant to box people in, but it expresses tendencies. It expresses tendencies of us to express based on these personality types. So, the Myers-Briggs personality inventory, it categorizes people into 16 different personality types based on their preferences for certain traits. So, the first is introversion, and extroversion. So, the introvert and the extrovert. And many people have heard of, someone being an extrovert versus an introvert. And I'm going to go through these very briefly in a moment. Then there's the sensor versus the intuitor. All right. And then there's the thinker versus the feeler. And then there's the judger versus the perceiver. Now, the judger is not exactly what you might think. It's not a person who's judgmental. It doesn't mean that. But there's the judger versus the perceiver. And an individual can be one of 16 combinations based on either of these four categories. So when we talk about, and I want to talk about the overview, the first, what we call dichotomies, or the first set of categories, and then we're going to take some time to go through what each of these mean and what it looks like over the next few weeks. So the first category is the introvert and the extrovert category. Now, much to or beyond what people's thought process around introversion and extroversion is, most people think introversion means people are shy or timid, and extroversion is people are outgoing, but it's not as simple as that. The introvert and the extrovert category really measures where people drive their energy, and it's useful to understand that these categories, the two dichotomies or the two ends of the category, are actually a spectrum. So it's not like you're one or the other, but you have a tendency towards one or a tendency toward the other. All right. So the introvert and the extrovert measures where people derive their energy. Do they derive them from being around people, or do they derive them from primarily recharging by spending time alone? The second set of the second category is the sensor versus the intuitor. So sensing versus intuition. And this actually measures how individuals process information, right? So the people who prefer sensing focus on things that are present, they're tangible, they kind of focus, they need that outside uh, feedback in order to know how to move in the world, whereas the intuitor or the intuitive is more internally focused, more imaginative focused, and they also tend to connect patterns and possibilities. Then you have the third category, which is the thinker or the feeler, right? So the thinker relies on facts and logic to make decision. They're very the logical objective, if you will, which if I were to go into objective, which I will, the thinking and the feeling, there really is no true objectivity. But the thinkers tend to be a little bit, they put together their decision making more logically, and the feelers make decisions based on values. Now, I want to really um, sort of put a emphasis on this because I think when people think of thinkers versus feelers, they think of logic versus emotion, and that people who are feelers make decisions based on emotion. The truth is, everybody at the end of the day will make a decision based on their emotion, right? They'll make a decision based on how they feel, the kinesthetic. The thinkers will have more of an influence of their logic, while feelers actually use their personal values, their core values, and their relationships to that they bring that forward to the forefront in their decision making. So it's not about feelings, it's about core values. And I love to me talk about me some values. That's what's important to us at the core. That's what drives us, right? So now the fourth category is judging versus perceiving. And the judger versus the perceiver, that measures a person's relationship to time and their preferred lifestyle. So people who are tend to be on the judging perspective or the judger's perspective, spectrum, excuse me, they prefer more structure and organization. And then people who are more perceivers, they actually prefer to have more spontaneity, and they tend to like less structure. So people who like lists are the people who are on the judge's side. People who like to just do things off the cuff, they may be more on the tendency of the um, perceiver side, right? So this is their relationship to time and lifestyle. Now I bring this to and like I said, this is a spectrum, right? So no person is just one or just the other. It is, where are you on the spectrum? And there are people who are sort of in the middle of the spectrum for some and on the edges of the spectrum for other categories. There are some people who line up on the edges for everything, and there are some people who line up along the center for everything and everywhere in between. So, like I said, and I want to reemphasize, this is not a place to box people in, but it's very useful to understand these tendencies, because when you understand it in yourself and you understand it with um, your children or your young people, then you can actually frame the way you interact with them in a way that is much more trauma informed, which is much more compassionate for you and for them. And you can also teach them how to be empowered within their personality, and teach them how they can interact with you. And so, like, give you an example, and keep in mind, like, children, their brains are always developing. So where they are on the spectrum now or as a young person, it may shift and change along the way, right? Because they're developing their brains until well into their 20s. But you can have a sense of where they are as they move along, and you can attune yourself to that, right? So as an example, I test, and when I really use my language intentionally here, I test on the introverted side, introverted close to the center line, right? And I definitely recharge in silence. Like, that is just, classic for me. My son, on the other hand, we don't test children in this way, but if I were to observe him, he really drives his energy from being around his friends, from being around people. He talk, 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 talk. He needs that energy. So he tends to live a little bit more on the extroverted side of the spectrum as of right now. Now, that doesn't mean that people who are extroverted can't enjoy time alone and people who are introverted cannot enjoy people. But just this example. So, a relationship between me and my son, especially that my son is my biggest coach, my biggest teacher, I have had to learn how to manage myself in a way that can be with the extrovertedness, the extroverted energy of my son. And I've also had to teach him that sometimes mommy needs quiet time so that I can attune him to my introverted nature as well. And what that has done is that helps him to actually expand his emotional intelligence, his observations, and be compassionate with people who don't have the same kind of personality as him. And so I say all this because I think it's very useful for us to begin to like really observe, in one of the last lives that I did, one of the last podcasts. And if you haven't listened to this podcast, go check it out, the Black Mind Garden podcast. One of the last podcasts that I did, I talked about understanding your children's values and what's important to them. Well, just as important as understanding their values is understanding their personality type. Because when you can understand how they interact with different aspects of the world, whether they're introverted, extroverted, whether they're thinkers, feelers, whether they're judges, perceivers, whether they're intuitors or sensors, then you can actually know how to interact with them, how to teach them how to be empowered in the world, knowing their personality, how to teach them to be more confident in themselves, and how to teach them even how to learn in the way that they most want to learn. And I think this is also important in classrooms as well. Like I said, while we don't necessarily test our children, understanding the nature of the spectrum is very useful. So I am going to be going through over the next 4 or 5 weeks or so, maybe 6 weeks or so, the dichotomy of these personalities and helping you to understand like what does it look like and how might you interact with the child who's introverted versus the child who's extroverted, given where you are. And if you haven't taken the test, you can go to 16personalities.com and you can take the test and see what your combination is. But and that's a good way for you to start to understand like where you are on the spectrum, so that you can, in relationship to your child, start to be compassionate and learn how to take care of yourself if you're not the same. And if you have multiple children, then you may have a child who's on the introverted side of the spectrum and a child who's on the extroverted side of the spectrum, and helps you understand your kids even better so that you can interact with them, like I said, in a more trauma-informed way. So I want you to stay tuned, because over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be deep diving into this a little bit. And this is the kind of thing that I teach in my NLP trainings, by the way. This is the type of things that when my parents come to learn from me, when doctors, when therapists, when educators come to learn, we go over some of these things, because I think it's important, if you want to be a master communicator, if you want to be trauma informed, to learn these nuances inside of communication and really human interaction, because, well, communication is human interaction and human interaction is communication. It's all interrelated. And so how we want to, if we want to improve the way we relate to our children, the way we relate to each other, and I talk about it in the context of children, but we also know that this is also in the context of our relationships, and our jobs, and our bosses, and our colleagues, and our staff, with our patients, our clients. So if you want to learn more about the real deep dive, which is the learning neuro-linguistic programming, how the words and the verbal and nonverbal communication impact our behavior, then I invite you to go to the website that you see. If you're on LinkedIn, go to the website you see there. You can book a discovery call. Remapmymind.com is the short version for those of you all who may be listening on YouTube or listening live with me on Instagram. Remapmymind.com will take you to the website and share with you a little bit more about what the training is about. And then you can actually book a call with me as well. So share this episode with a friend, share it with a colleague, share it with a family member. something this might be useful, have them join us over the next few weeks as we deep dive into this, and leave us a review if you like this episode and the ones that we've done in the past and the ones we'll be doing moving along, because this is the way we get the message out. So as always, I am committed to seeing you empowered, because you're the bridge to the next generation of empowered and resilient leaders. So until next time, you all have a great rest of the way, rest of the day, rest of the way too, and a great rest of the week. And namaste.